Women and people of color have a harder time in academia. It's not an opinion, it's a fact. The system is not built to help and accommodate these people. But thankfully, there are people who are here to help. And I'm talking to one of these people today. Hi everyone! Welcome back to Growing to Your PhD. I'm Emma, your coach, and I help overwhelmed researchers grow into thriving academics using simple and research-backed strategies. And in this Chatty Monday episode, I'm talking to Jennifer Harrison about all things research and academia, but especially how she helps people of color and women write their thesis, keep themselves on time, while also keeping their sanity. Hi everyone, welcome back to Chatty Monday. I'm talking to Jennifer Harrison today, and she's going to tell us all about everything that she does, coaching people, especially through writing their thesis. She's especially helping women, people of color, so that's very exciting, and I'm really interested to talk to you more about that. Let's start with the first question, or first, hi.
Hi.
I'm glad you're here. Let's start with the first question so that people can get to know you right away. So, who are you and how did you get to where you are today?
Okay, so I am, as you said, Dr. Jen Harrison, and I'm a dissertation coach. I'm based in the US. I originally did my PhD in the UK, which is kind of half of where I grew up. And so my PhD was in children's literature. After I finished my PhD, I was teaching in academia for a while. I then left academia and actually trained to be a secondary school teacher. And I had my kids and decided I didn't want to be a full-time teacher anymore. So I started a business tutoring people. And then we decided that we didn't like the UK anymore, and we moved to the US, and I was a professor again in a US college teaching writing. And what all of this kind of adds up to is I accumulated all of this kind of very disparate expertise in writing and in research and in how academia works, but also in like how to be a good teacher. And when the pandemic hit in 2020 and academic jobs were looking a bit ropey, I decided it was time to go back to having my own business. And that's when I started the dissertation coaching business. And I very quickly discovered that the people who needed me most were the people who were a lot like me, who were first generation, who were women of color, who were kind of struggling to fit into that academic mold. And so that's where my specialty area has ended up being, is in helping those women.
I love this. I think really minorities and women are also minorities, even though not in number, but in systems of oppressions. They are really people who need more help, truly, to succeed. Not because they're not able, but because the system that we're in makes it harder because it has just higher expectations or things like, what's the word I'm looking for? Stereotype threats that work against you, basically.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I'm really glad you put it that way, actually, because I think a lot of the women who come to me for help feel like it is that they're not good enough or they're not able enough. But that's never the case. You know, as soon as they have the right tools and the right help, they fly. And it is because the system is not set up to support them and is sometimes actively set up to make it difficult for them.
No. So I'm glad that you're there and that you're supporting these people, like this specific group. You work mostly with people in the US at the moment, or do you work with people worldwide?
I do actually work with people worldwide. So I'd say probably 65% of the students I work with are in the US. There's a good number of students who work with me from Canada. And then I have a few students in the UK, a few students in Australia, a few in
Uh-huh.
India. So it's kind of scattered about.
So it is quite general. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
How do you feel about working with people from different places? What does it bring you?
You know, it's really exciting. I think one of the things that when you do work in academia, it can get very, what's the word when, you know, you're really stuck in one little niche. You only see one group of people, one.
Siloed.
That's the word. Yeah, it gets very siloed. Doing the work this way, I get to see so many different systems and approaches to academia
Mm.
and, you know, different ways of working and of researching. And that's really exciting. And sometimes I'll be talking to my husband about what my students are doing, and he's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating because like you wouldn't learn all of this if you were just working as a professor in a department. And I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
look at this cool thing that's happening in psychology. Or hey, did you know they're doing this in Australia with like wetlands? And it's really exciting.
Yeah. Typically, you still end up working with people who are international, right? Because academia
Yeah.
is very international, but there is still a majority of people from the country that you're typically based in
Yeah.
just as a
Yep.
normal thing. So then you get to discover a lot more systems, and obviously you get to discover a lot more types of research, which is also one of the things that I enjoy as a trainer because I base my training in research. So I then go and research topics like psychology, like communication, which I never knew about before in terms of proper research on the topic, you know?
Yeah.
And this
Yep.
is one of the things that I love about the job.
Definitely. And I think as well, the way that research happens in general, it has its foundations in how researchers are trained when they're in their PhD phase or their dissertation phase,
Mm.
and seeing how different some of the foundational principles and values are in those programs, just like tiny differences, like the fact that programs in the US are very, very rigid, very structured, very hand-holdy. Programs in the UK are very hands-off, go away, do it on your own, figure it out. Just little differences like that have ripple effects down the
Yeah.
road to what research looks like.
Yeah. That's very interesting. I could talk about this all day, but we should probably get going with the second question.
We probably should.
What's one thing that you loved about your research and one thing that you appreciate about your current position?
Oh, okay. So I was very indulgent with my research. I picked a topic based on what I loved, which was children's literature. I always loved, I got to like research Winnie the Pooh and Alice
I
in
mean,
Wonderland.
who does not pick a research topic that they love? Like
That's
if
true.
you do
That's true.
this
But
job and you don't love it, like there's a
it
problem.
felt more like play, I think is what I'm trying to say. Like it felt like I didn't really feel like I was studying at all. And then I got to like look at all of these really kind of fun theories and but I got to apply them to what was essentially kids' books, which I mean that's what I loved most was that I got to spend an extra how many years reading children's books where most people have to stop at that time. That was what I loved most about my research. But what I love about my position right now, I think, is just the sheer number of people that I get to meet and the amazing work that they're doing. And I think a lot of the time when I worked in academia, there was a lot of frustration. Students were frustrated, professors were
Mm.
frustrated. Everyone kind of felt like they were fighting. A lot of the time, it felt like teaching students who didn't really want to be there or who weren't in quite the right place, or there were students who were struggling, but you weren't allowed to help them for whatever reason, or, students wanted things that professors couldn't give, or professors wanted to do things that the administration wouldn't allow. In the job I'm in now, people come to me because they want help, and then I give them help, and then they're happy, and I'm happy, and everyone's happy. And that's just like a wonderful place to be.
I love that. I mean, it's not that there's no frustration in the job. Like people do come frustrated at the beginning, but they're willing to do the work. At the point when they're hiring you and they're putting money into it, they're willing to do the work
Exactly.
and then you can work together to make things better.
Yes. Yeah. It feels like there's a lot less getting in the way of what everybody really wants to do, which is just get on with their studies and their research.
I love that. Both that you got to love on children's book a bit longer and that you have less frustration and less tension in the position that you are now. Okay, what were your best and worst days as a researcher and what did each of them teach you?
Ooh, okay. Best day as a researcher, I think, would be the day when I was presenting at a conference and the top researcher whose work I was citing happened to be in the audience at the time. And it just sparked this wonderful conversation, but also just that like that sense of community you get when, you
Mm.
often as a researcher, you write a paper and you're kind of dialoguing with all these other researchers who are abstract ideas in your head. And then because children's lit is such a small field, to be presenting a paper and have that person in that room and be actually able to really dialogue with them and start this conversation that kind of took off and blossomed, that was a very exciting moment. I think that's why we all really get into research is we want to be having those conversations and thinking those deeper questions through with other people, not just on our own. So that
I
was the
agree.
most exciting day, I think. And then the worst day as a researcher, oh goodness. I mean, it's hard to pin down one specific day, but I think my worst time as a researcher was just before COVID hit. I
Mm.
was adjuncting as a professor, and I don't know if you know much about the adjunct system in the US, but it's brutal. You don't get job security, and you are, basically the workhorse of the faculty. And so I was working these kind of maybe 18-hour days, 20-hour days, grading was piled on, be on this committee, be on that committee. It was kind of nonstop and trying to do my own research as well. And it was being squeezed into the corners and I was doing it, I was getting stuff published, but I was just exhausted. I was grumpy, like I was horrible to my family at the time. It was a bad situation. And I don't think I would have left unless COVID had forced me to. So I think that was the worst time, was when my own well-being was completely submerged in what the job was requiring.
I hear you. I think you're not alone in having that experience. I think a lot of people at one point or another go through that. And that's the point where either they decide to leave or they completely change the way that they go about things so that it can become more sustainable. It's interesting that you say if COVID hadn't hit, you maybe wouldn't have realized. What is it about the pandemic that put everything in the spotlight? Can you point me to it?
Yeah, well, I would love to say that like it was an eye-opening moment and that, I suddenly, but I didn't. I think the thing about COVID that pushed me was the fact that the university took the jobs away. And so it was like, you're
Yeah,
going to have to
yeah.
find something different. And I could have kind of scrambled around the country looking for places that were still hiring, but I had two small children. My husband was really settled in his job. We'd bought a house. I was like, you know what? I know the expectation in academia is that you pick up and you move everything to chase the job down, but I'm not doing that. I'm quite comfortable here. This is where I want to be. And so I think something has to change. I can't keep doing this. And I think it's really important to understand that, because when you're in one of those toxic academic work cultures, it's really hard to see outside of it. You don't realize how damaging it is. It feels normal when you're on the inside.
Yeah. Yes.
And it also feels like you don't really have other options in your career, that like that is the
Yes.
single path that is open to you. And so I think a lot of energy and misery goes into that. And it's really, really hard unless something from the outside pushes you to realize what's going on.
Yeah. I think this is really important what you're saying. So it's not just that overwork and these kind of publish or perish or these kind of things are ingrained in academia, but beyond that, there are really places that are more toxic, even more
Yeah,
toxic. And I agree with you, it's very hard for people in that space to realize. And it's a bit the frog in water, it kind of the boiling kind of starts slowly going up and you
yeah,
don't realize it until it gets very, very bad. I've had a few friends report similar things to me where so we had this discussion with Caroline on the very first Chatty Monday, and she was someone she pivoted from physics to atmospheric science, theoretical physics, and that was mainly because she was really in a bad situation with the job and in a bad culture, and
yeah,
it didn't feel like there was any way to get out, and so she looked for something else, and it was in a completely different area of physics essentially, but it was then much better for her. And I've had like several friends report these kind of things of it started with a small thing and then another and then another and then it accumulates and you don't realize until it's too late.
yeah. Yep. And like I should add, I've also worked in institutions that were amazing and had
Yeah.
a wonderful culture. Like we're really well. And if I had stayed in those places, things might have been different. But I think I get a little bit of a skewed picture as well, because obviously the students who are reaching out to me are
Mm,
primarily reaching out because they are struggling. And so they are more often than not in one of those difficult situations. But it's interesting how often that negative culture starts with your experience as a graduate student. And that's what kind
mm,
of conditions you to then accept it when you meet it in your next job and your next job and your next job. So it becomes quite
true.
normalized.
True. And to come back to what you said, I actually didn't know. So during COVID, the people who were adjuncts were just let go. There was no class, not even online then.
So this was very variable. So a lot of smaller institutions relied heavily on adjunct teaching, and adjuncts
Uh-huh.
are temporary. So they're nearly always qualified. They have all of the qualifications to be a professor, but instead of being hired as a professor on a tenure track line, they are hired on a 6-month contract or a 2-month contract or a single class or a single
Yeah.
semester. And they never know from semester to semester whether they've got a job the following semester. The institution I was working at the time had a policy where if you had worked full time as an adjunct for 5 years, continuously with no breaks, you could then become a tenure track professor. What they would usually do is give you 4.5 years and then take away a single class for that final semester so that you would then not get tenure track. It was really demoralizing. I had a young family in a house, and every semester there was this unbelievable amount of anxiety about, am I going to be able to pay my mortgage next month? I don't know. So that was bad even before COVID hit. But yeah, when COVID hit, obviously those temporary workers who were on 6-month contracts were the easiest to get rid of so that healthcare didn't need to be covered. The costs could be considerably lowered as the university was struggling to adapt to everything. So yeah, I think it was in March that the worst of the pandemic shutdowns began. And when that September deadline rolled around, we were all just told, sorry, you have no job. You have no job, you have no healthcare. Good luck to you.
Yeah. I mean, let's not get into the healthcare part. Like, I think the fact that the US doesn't have it is mind-boggling to me as someone who is European, where it just exists for everyone as a mandatory thing. That's interesting because I obviously lived this, but from the point of view of a young PhD student, I literally started in February 2020, and by mid-March 2020, everything was closed down. So I was a month and a half into the PhD when things closed down for COVID. So that was an experience in and of itself. But so I was a young PhD and I was in Germany at the time. And I think in Europe, I mean, things still varied from country to country, but we still had similar experiences within academia in Europe, which I think is in a way still very different from what happened in the US. So it's interesting to have that perspective as well.
Like, I remember just feeling almost a sense of peace when, like, I kind of saw it coming. We had already been fighting. Like, I was at my 4.5 year mark and I was like, I don't think they're going to give me that, that last semester so that I can become tenure track. And what am I going to do? And then it was like, oh, things are shutting down. People are losing their jobs. Well, that's that then. Like, I know they're not going to give it to me. I know I'm about to lose my job. And I started my business before I lost my job because I knew it was coming. And that weight that was lifted when suddenly people were being like, we need you to design an online course immediately. And I was like, and if I don't do it, I'm going to lose a job that I'm going to lose anyway. So, like, I don't have to carry this stress anymore. You can stress. I don't have to because you've already kind of jettisoned me. And that, I think, was the turning point when I realized, I don't have to jump every time someone says jump.
That's such an important thing. Like, when you feel that feeling and it's not the one that you expected, it's not the fear and it's not the anxiety anymore. And it's actually, I'm just so happy to be done. Then it means that you're on the right path.
Yeah. And it's not that there wasn't any fear and anxiety. Starting a business is a scary thing. It's suddenly you're in charge of your destiny, but you're in charge of your destiny. You don't have to fear somebody else anymore. And it's kind of, all I have to do to make this work is make it work. I don't have to depend on somebody else's goodwill or whims or whether they like me or, I can make this work.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, being in business is exciting. I feel you on that point. As you said, like maybe in other situation and in other places, academia could have worked out for you, but it's just in that particular place it didn't. And there are things outside of academia that we have to take into account. Your family, the place where you live, and you might not want to move. All of these things they influence us, and like trying to say that they don't or that they shouldn't, it makes no sense.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the norm in academia. Is academia comes first, life comes second, and I think it's important to flip that around.
Yes.
And it's what I try and teach the students who come my way, because like I said, that mindset starts when you're a graduate student.
Agreed, 100% with everything you say.
I just had there's a new student who's thinking of starting with me, and I just had an email from her this morning to say, want to clarify a few points. And one of her points was, what is your expectation around the holidays for students? And so it was so satisfying writing back going, this is probably not what you're expecting, but I expect you over the holidays to take a holiday, to take a rest, spend time with your family. I'll understand if you can't or don't want to, and I'll support you in that. But that's like what I recommend is take the holiday.
I love that advice. Actually, during my PhD, one of the things that I was doing is like, I was pushing people. Have you taken your holidays? Have you taken your holidays? Have you taken your holidays? Like all of my colleagues, regularly, I would interrogate them to know how many holidays they still had on their card. And if they hadn't taken, then I was like trying to push.
And I do like a defense training course, and probably 40% of that defense training course is I want to tell you how to stop prepping for your defense because you're going to over prep and you're going to burn yourself out.
Mm.
Like we're going to work really hard on keeping the balance here. This is the first time in your PhD where you've been left completely unsupervised to prep for a really stressful thing. Don't spend all your time prepping.
Yeah, finding a way to have that balance. That's also something that is hard also when you're not in an office anymore, now that I'm working mostly from home. One thing that I've discovered is that doing a break and going for a walk, like in the middle of the afternoon at some point, that really helps because at some point in the afternoon I get unfocused anyways. So I might as
Yeah.
well just go walk and then I can focus again afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one of my students who we ended up building time into her workday for her to take a nap at a time when she always
Yeah.
feels sleepy. And we like made that part of her work schedules. And her thinking had been, I have to get this done. And if I take a nap, I won't get them done and then I'll be behind. And I was like, okay, we're dropping some of the things from your to-do list and making the nap part of that to-do list instead. And then if you don't take your nap, hey, bonus, you get a couple of extra things done, but it's not the expectation that you do that. And she just
Yeah.
gets done now because she's not guilty about having had to take that
Exactly.
break.
This is so important. Like the guilt and
Yeah.
the shame and the feeling like you should be doing this thing, but you're not, and I'm tired, so I can't do it. Like the guilt that comes with all of that, it sucks out more of the energy than actually doing the thing that is restful, followed by doing the thing that you're supposed to do. Once you've rested, it's so much easier to do the thing.
Yeah, I think there's often an all or nothing mentality. Like, I've got to get it all done, or else I'm a failure and I may as well do none of it. And it's hard to learn that skill of just doing a little bit and going slowly and not pushing yourself too hard.
There's that, and there's also the thing of, but what if I do this and I appear unprofessional? What if I go into the break room and I take a nap? Or what if I go out for like 15 to 30 minutes every afternoon to go for a walk? Will that affect the way people perceive me? Or if I arrive later than usual because I tend to go to bed later and to wake up later? Like those things are often part of the equation where we feel this is the right choice for us, but we fear other people are going to judge us for making that choice.
Yeah, and I think especially, we talked about the fact that women in particular need more help. The system is not set up. And I think a lot of that comes into play as well because, I'll work with students who have young kids that they have to get off to nursery school in the morning before they can
Yeah.
start work for the day. And their day is gonna be disrupted by another kid waking up from his nap at X time. And then they know that they've got to take care of all the groceries and the laundry in their household because,
Mm.
either they're a single mom or their partner is off like at a day job miles away, or, they're caring for a parent and that's going to mean medical runs during the day. And, some of these women are then sitting down to do their work at 9 p.m. and they're
Mm.
like, okay, now everyone else has gone away and left me alone. I can finally focus. And it's no wonder they're tired. But the system isn't set up to say, hey, you've got 17 extra things in your day that the normal male
Mm.
undergraduate student wouldn't have. So let's give you a little bit extra time to get this done.
Yeah, this this is really complicated. Like making the system flexible enough so that it can accommodate non-mold abiding students
Yeah.
or non-mold abiding professionals in general, academics, people who have more in their lives than just academia.
Yeah.
The system
But
is
I
not
think
set up
it
for that.
it starts with the culture though, doesn't it? Because if you've
Yeah.
got a supervisor who's saying, if you don't meet this deadline, you're not as good as the other students, regardless of what
Yeah.
extra you're having to pack into your life
Yeah.
to meet that deadline,
Yeah.
like that sets up an expectation that isn't realistic.
True, true, true. I mean, a lot of academia, as always, comes down to group culture and institution culture, and that's very variable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to question 4. What's a secret that you've discovered about succeeding in academia or outside that you wish more people understood?
Ooh. I think for both, for within academia and outside of academia, it's going to come down to finding your tribe, having your people. I think that is important for so many different things. So just straight up academic success depends on you networking, like knowing the people who are working in your field, sharing ideas with them, publishing, collaborating. For wellness and well-being, having people who sympathize, who share your experiences that you can like offload emotionally onto. or just spend quality time with is like gold dust for your mental health. Outside of academia, like if you're trying to fit academia into your life, being able to lean on your mom to watch the kids for a weekend or your partner to cook dinner because you've got to finish a paper or whatever it might be, like having your people around you and making those the right people who are going to support you and lift you up. Like I think that's the secret. And then also it's not just friends and family as well, like knowing that you can hire people when you need to. Like, why are you staying up after a full day looking after your family, trying to make APA formatting happen at midnight when you could just hire an editor whose job is to do that? And, if you can afford that, go ahead and do it. Like, don't be afraid to book a taxi driver or hire a babysitter or hire an editor or hire a coach if you're struggling or any of these things. Hire a therapist if you're feeling depressed. There are people out there whose jobs are to make your life easier. So yeah, have all the people resources around you that will make life better.
I absolutely love this. Relationships are so, so, so important, not just the close ones that you can rely on a daily, weekly basis, like your family, like your friends. But I agree, having community, not just the colleagues in your workplace, but beyond that, a community of people who are in your field or a community just of people in academia who understand what you're going through. I feel that's really, really important. Yeah. And one of the things that I wish I had a bit more of when I was doing my PhD, which is also one of the reasons why I'm trying to do that now more, like on LinkedIn, on Slack. I have a Slack community as well.
Yeah.
That's really
I was
important.
really lucky as a PhD student. There was a really, really strong community around me, like both just of friends and family in the town where I was in. Well, not so much family, but friends in the town where I was in, and a really strong interdepartmental community, faculty members who were very good at teaching you how to build that community in your field outside of the institution. And I was shocked when I became a professor in the US at how different the
Mm.
culture was and how isolated the students were and how little of that community they had. And that was one of the reasons that I kind of promote
Mm.
what I do now.
Yeah. So in Heidelberg, what was interesting is that my professor had a very big group. Like he had a lot of PhD students and a lot of master students and a lot of postdocs. So we did have a sense of support and a sense of having people around us. But that was not the case for a lot of other people. A lot of other people, there were like maximum 2, 3 PhD students for this professor's group, and they didn't interact with the professor all that much, and like basically they interacted every 6 months or something, whereas with my professor we saw each other almost every day on the walk to lunch. So it's
Yeah.
like those are very different experiences, and definitely they lead to very different results.
Yeah. My supervisor had previously been a monk, is what I was told. And he was just the kindest, calmest,
Oh.
most balanced. Like he was a delight. And it felt very much like a family in that department. All of the faculty members would socialize with the students as well as working with them. All the students kind of socialize together. There was a lot of kind of events and activities organized that brought us all together. And it was a small town as well and a small department. And it was just a very nice feeling that you always felt like there was someone to talk to.
It's interesting also the dichotomy of it's a small town and a small department, but somehow you feel more connected and like you have more support than in a lot of other places that are just bigger but more impersonal, if that makes sense.
Definitely.
And that's something that I would then to make it even more actionable, because this is something that people should look for. But then I would be very careful in applying to places. You don't necessarily know when you apply, but you do get to know when you interview.
Yeah.
Because when you go into interview, you get a feeling of what is the vibe.
Yeah, 100%. And especially with that supervisor, because they could be the most advanced person in their field with all the experience and tons of successful PhD students, but do you connect with them? Because if you
Yeah.
get the wrong vibe from them, it's going to be an unpleasant few years.
Yeah. So interviewing and being aware not just of the concrete signs of success like publication rates, etc., but also the softer, more human signs of success like community and support is very important. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And just do your personalities mesh? Does their way of communicating match your style of learning, for
Yeah.
example?
Yeah, true. Okay, question 5. What's one thing that bothers you about the system and that you would like to change?
I think we've covered this one. The thing that bothers me about the system is the one size fits all. I think
Mhm.
that's the biggest thing. That kind of expectation. I see this a lot with students as well, who they're told, okay, you've got to write your problem statement or you've got to write your first chapter. And they ask for like, okay, well, what does that look like? Because they've never written one before. They've probably never read one before. And they're told, oh, just go and look at other models. Like, I'm not giving you instructions. Just go and look at other models and you'll figure it out. And so they do, and they try, and then they hand it in. Their supervisor is like, no, this is wrong. I'm like, well, if you've seen as many dissertations and programs and supervisors as I have, there is no wrong. Everyone thinks their way is the only way and the best way, but not just the best way, the only way. Like they don't acknowledge that there are other ways of doing this, but they tell the students to go and look at other examples. And so the poor student is like caught in this horrible dilemma of like, there's 700 different ways to write a problem statement, but my supervisor only got one in his head and I'm supposed to guess what that is without any guidance because they want me to just go and look at everybody else's because they assume everybody else's will look like just what they have in their head. It's crazy. So I think that bugs me. Like this assumption that not only does one size fit all, but there is really only one size and it's our one.
That is so true. That's also one of the things that bothers me. And it's actually part of my ethos is to have information that is research backed, action oriented, and individualized for this specific reason, because the one size fits all makes literally no sense. I know that some people are not able to recognize that people are different from them, but I see those differences very clearly. And because of that, it makes no sense in my mind as well. And I agree with you that there's both this assumption of if you look it enough, you will figure it out. We actually talked about this with Ellen, the last person that I interviewed. She was like, this assumption that people will just learn by osmosis makes no sense. And I completely agree with her. But also there's this thing of not only will you not learn by osmosis, but if people don't set their expectations, they can't expect you to meet them. And
Yeah.
that dichotomy also doesn't really make sense.
Yeah, and of course, like what happens when you have an expectation but don't tell the student what it is and tell them to go and figure it out is they Google it and they find out that there's 700 different ways to do this, and then they just feel let down by you. Nobody's
Mm.
really achieved anything then. And
Mm.
they become confused and, they start to think that there is no way of doing this or that there's some kind of special insider knowledge that they just haven't been granted. And I think that's where a lot of the toxicity starts.
True. Do you have any specific tip for people who are in that situation, for example, and they realize, okay, they're expecting something from me, but when I asked, they didn't give much feedback? Like, how can they go about trying to find the information that they need, probably from the professor themselves and not just the internet? Is there any kind of tip that you have for that?
This one is difficult because it really depends on why they're not getting the feedback.
Mm.
Most of the time, the professor just doesn't realize that they're not being helpful.
Mm.
So a lot of students have an expectation that the professor knows what they're doing and knows how to give feedback. And so communication breaks down. So I would say the first port of call is to be really, really specific with the professor about what you need and why the feedback isn't working for you.
Mm.
So asking for more specifics, like asking very precise questions, saying, can I have the answer to this within X amount of days to meet my
Mm.
deadline? So like really stating what you need and why
Mm.
you need it can help. Because if it's just that the professor doesn't understand what you need, then that's problem sorted.
Mm.
Then you have some professors who are not giving it because they think you should struggle, and that's the only way to prove what you're doing. That's a more difficult situation. A short-term, not great solution, but that sometimes helps is to go and look at the work of any students that have graduated from that professor's program within the last kind of 6 months to a year. That should
Yeah.
give you a gauge that you can compare. Okay, they passed this work, so it's probably close to what they're looking for, but that's not brilliant either. You may end up in a confrontational situation then, because I think you do have to advocate for your right to have decent feedback on your work. And if you
Mm.
are getting a blunt refusal from your supervisor, that might be time to escalate that to a program director or to an ombudsman. Sometimes you do end up in that situation where the professor simply isn't going to be helpful, and that
Mm.
is something you have a right to. So then it comes down to what are you willing to fight for?
That makes sense. I think that's very helpful for people who are in that situation to have this idea of it could be this, it could be that. So let's first try this. And if it's not this, then let's patch it up another way. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, don't jump immediately to the conclusion that you
No.
just have a supervisor who hates you, But if you do try everything else and you're not making any progress, then and it is worth speaking up, because sometimes you just have a lazy professor, and a little bit of pushback will get you what you need, because it's less effort for them to give you what you need than to fight with you. And then sometimes even that won't work, but making a complaint will get you a new supervisor, or, there will be someone somewhere in your institution, hopefully, who wants you to succeed. And it's a case of, working through until you find that person.
Yeah. And it might also just be that you don't fit in terms of working style, but if you don't advocate for the things that you need, then you're the only one struggling. And then that's also not the situation that you want to be in. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, once you speak up, what usually happens is you find that professor's other students are having similar problems, and a group of voices is always stronger than a single voice.
No, that is very true. So it's like, if you're the person who keeps having the problem, then maybe you might be the problem. But if the professor is the person who keeps having the problem, they might be the problem.
Sometimes there's no problem at all except poor communication. You're
True.
expecting the professor knows what they should be giving you, and the professor expects that you would ask if you needed it. And so nobody really gets anywhere, and you just have to ask and then you receive. But
Yes. So that's the first thing. Is like, first step is check the communication and then escalate. If it doesn't resolve with better communication, escalate. Yeah, makes sense.
I think it's worth remembering for students as well that most professors are not education specialists. They're specialists in their field, they're specialist researchers, but they may not be trained in pedagogy. And teaching is a skill. Like, you have to learn how to give good feedback. You have to learn how to communicate concepts. So don't assume that your professor knows how to teach you.
Yeah. The fact that people who become professors are mostly judged on things that have nothing to do with teaching is mind-boggling to me still to this day. And the fact that, again, you expect people to just know these things or just learn, and they don't necessarily. Yeah, that's a very important reminder. Okay, let's move on to question 6. What's one person that you look up to or are grateful for on your scientific journey?
Oh, it's going to be Professor Peter Barry. He was my supervisor. And like I said, he was absolutely wonderful. So he still remains my kind of role model for what academia should be.
That's really nice to have that experience with a supervisor. That's really important.
Yeah. And he, like I said, it was I mean, he ended up coming to my wedding, I think. And I remember getting
Oh,
booties from him when my first child was born. Like, he stayed in my life and has always been the kind of high bar that I set when I think about academia.
and what you're training your students to become.
Exactly, yeah. Because he was very clear that, like, first he taught me how to do research properly, but then he also taught me, like, how to value myself as a researcher, like how to understand that I wasn't the lowest of the low as a PhD student. And he taught me to balance life and work. And I forgot that for a few years after finishing my PhD. But, it's always kind of his calm, smiling face that comes back into my head when, I think about, what am I really doing here?
I love this so much. And also, I think it's important to stress, since you said, I forgot it for a time. It's okay sometimes we get into situations that are not the best, but we get out of them eventually. And even if we have to relearn a lesson several times, eventually it will stick, and eventually you will get into a better place.
Yeah.
Very last question. What are your predictions about the future of research in the next 10 years?
Oh, that's a heavy question. I'm going to be
Yes.
super optimistic and say that I think we're at a low right now, and so things have to swing back up in a good direction over the next few years. And I think I will leave it at that and let listeners interpret that how they will.
Perfect. I'm very much an optimist as well. So I also very much hoping things are on the rise. I don't know if it's in the near future, the more distant future, but I'm always hoping for a better future at some point.
Yes, I think it has to. I think same as it felt at the bottom of COVID when we all felt like the world was ending, it's got to swing back up again, and it will.
I love this. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was an amazing conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Me too.
So, do you want to tell everyone a bit more about what you do and how they can find you? I will link your LinkedIn for sure in the post, both in the YouTube video and the LinkedIn post.
So I help, like I said, primarily women, and especially women of color, but really any student at all who's doing a graduate program and needs a little bit of help. I help with writing, I help with research design, I help with motivation, accountability, well-being. So anything at all that you're struggling with in your PhD, you can reach out to me and I will find a way to help you. The best way to contact me is to either reach out on LinkedIn via a direct message or to go to my website, which is www.readwriteperfect.com, and you can book a free call with me there. And I'd love to meet you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope everyone who needs a bit of help, especially with writing and all of these things and all of the mental health aspect as well, does reach out to you. Thank you so much for joining me. It was
Thank
very,
you.
very nice. And see you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching this Chatty Monday episode with Jennifer Harrison. If you found our conversation as interesting as I did, please like, subscribe, hit the bell so that you get notified whenever one of these academic interviews rolls around. I hope you guys have a great week, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.